Hey everybody, it's John Krask with Every Library, the Every Library Institute. It is Banned Books Week 2025. We are Friday of Banned Books Week 2025. If you have not had an opportunity yet to check in with our other programming, we've been on all week. We have on-demand, instant replay, ready to watch conversations with authors and narrators, authors and illustrators, publishing professionals about the culture of reading, the joy of writing, and what the heck's going on in America today. The censorship issues and the book ban issues are certainly front and center. It is Banned Books Week after all. We're looking to have these conversations about libraries and about reading, about the intersection point between authors and their craft of storytelling, as well as authors and their readers, the people who pick them up and say, that was a pretty good book, I really enjoyed it. We have on demand on Every Library Facebook, Every Library YouTube, and then the remainder of today, and then a bonus on Saturday, October 11th. Again, you have to look it up online if this is later. A bonus for Let Freedom Read Day. So I want to bring in two wonderful humans to talk about ancient wisdom and future America. So first off, Frank Saverio, Douglas Vigliotti. I'm sorry, Douglas, I apologize. Vigliotti. I want to do the official bios and then have a little chat if we could. So Frank, thanks for being here. Frank Saverio is the author of An Unlikely Phoenix. He grew up on science fiction and fantasy. After a stint in the U.S. Army as a linguist, he became a police officer in 1993. He retired in 2013 as a captain. Frank has written over 50 novels, most of them gritty crime fiction from both sides of the badge, as Frank Saverio, along with some heartwarming humor as Frank Scalise. Aside from writing, Frank is a martial artist, an avid hockey fan, and a tortured guitarist. He lives in Central Oregon with his wife and a pair of cats who remain skeptical of his artistic endeavors. Frank, I often say I have two cats that live in my house. I know the feeling. So, Douglas Vigliotti is the author of 4 books, including Aristotle for Novelists, Tom Collins' A Slightly Crooked Novel, which is available to listen to on Slightly Crooked, a Good Stories Well Told podcast. It also features his raw and unorthodox poem collection called Mini Heartbreaks. He is also the host of Books for Men, a weekly podcast to inspire more men to read, or men to read more, I would assume, too, Douglas. He lives in Manhattan. Thank you for being here. Oh, Douglas, are we good on the mic? I'm sorry. Can you unmute yourself? I apologize.
Pleasure to be here. Apologize.
We're great now. Cool. As long as we're able to work the buttons, we're great. Yeah. No, it's one of those things. It's a live event. Let's have some fun. All right. I want to spend a little time with both of you, but Frank, I want to start with you if I could, and talking about An Unlikely Phoenix, because it is one of my favorite genres, speculative fiction about America in the future. And though I've enjoyed speculative fiction about America in the past too, you're sort of the Man in the High Castle type books, you know. Your novel, An Unlikely Phoenix, is near future sci-fi, alternative history, action, crime thriller, politics, social commentary, satire. When did you start writing it, and did you know it was going to be this kind of a 2025, Frank?
I hoped it wouldn't be. I started writing it in 2017 after an event where a driver drove his vehicle into a crowd of protesters or an assembled crowd during a peaceable demonstration. And that act, and then the response from the president at the time disturbed me a little bit. The comments of, rather than condemning the act period, there was a lot of equivocation, and it really highlighted the polarization of the nation that had been developing for some time and seemed to be getting worse. And I just kind of, being a catastrophic thinker in general, I guess, which is usually a weakness, became a strength in this particular situation, because I started thinking, well, what if things like this kept happening? And leadership begins at the top. There's a trickle down effect of leadership that people tend to embrace what's acceptable and what direction should we go. And so I just kind of worst case scenario that whole thing and trotted out what things might be like in 2028 if that kind of mindset and behavior continued.
Can you take us through the bullet on the storyline too?
Sure. It's 2028, and the current president has just been reelected for a fourth term. There's been a degradation of civil rights and a increasing centralization of power in the executive branch. Police have been nationalized, and there's growing discontent between some states that lean left in the central government, which has leaned progressively more right, and there are elements within that are even more radical that maybe are shades of National Socialism, reborn, which is kind of where the title came from, in that the United States of America would be an unlikely place for that phoenix to rise again, and yet pockets of the far right are exhibiting exactly that. So there's a bit of a secessionist movement going on along the West Coast, and there's just a lot of tension. The series, the story features two protagonists. One is a police officer in St. Louis, and then his brother is a state senator in California. And so we see things through both of their perspectives.
Yeah. So your experience as a law enforcement officer, those portrayals of power, those portrayals of authority, those portrayals of resistance that come out of that. I mean, you started this earlier than the pandemic even, and those tropes are not uncommon in American history. But at this present moment, I mean, did you expect to be writing something that was so near, as it were?
No, I mean, I hoped not. I hoped not. I still actively teach leadership in the law enforcement field, and I have great reverence for my former profession and the vast majority of the men and women who consistently do a difficult job, a job that's getting to be more and more difficult and complex every day, and year by year, certainly. And yet, there are things that have occurred since I wrote this book that have unfortunately been spot on. I mean, the use of the focus on immigration, for instance, was something that I leaned into heavily in the book, and that's happening. The use of police and also the justice system to attack personal enemies within politics. The division between the states and the federal government is another key piece. And I mean, I didn't think it was going to happen. I just worried that it might.
Mm-hmm.
And then just, the catastrophic thinker in me took it to the nth degree, which is looking less and less strange where we're sitting right now.
The use of speculative fiction, the tropes within speculative fiction, the mechanism of speculative fiction allows for not just prognostication, which is, we all sit around an armchair conversation, barstool conversation. Oh, this is going to happen. That's going to happen. But when I engage a novel that is written in that speculative fiction style, with that genre, it's also to help, I think, move a conversation forward. And I'm guessing that there's some conversations about the nature and character of America, but also the nature and character, as I mentioned before, about power and authority and resistance that you're looking to spool up a bit.
Absolutely. I mean, my undergraduate degree is in history. I'm a huge history buff. I'm not very strange in that Rome is one of the areas that I paid attention to, among others. And you just, when you study history with a critical eye, you start to see certain patterns develop. And I mean, what is history but the story of human behavior? All human behavior. And so you start to see certain patterns develop. And I framed this book as actually being, at least the prologues to each chapter, coming from a history book written in 2081 about this time period. And so it's kind of got the idea of history being important woven into the fabric of it when it's presented partially as an historical document. And so somebody once said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember who said that. I'd look smarter than I do right now.
Oh, but, don't worry, I'm in the same boat. I'm trying to recall.
and so you see things going on today that, people point to different flashpoints in history and point out the similarities, and they're not dissimilar. I mean, I think there's cause for concern when you see those behaviors, and you can get as specific or as granular as you like, but I think the mere polarization itself is a huge danger, because people stop talking to each other like brothers and sisters, and they start to other people based upon political views, and then you don't have meaningful conversations. You have an exchange of political slogans and then conflict, and that doesn't help us solve any problems.
Right. Let me bring in Douglas on this conversation too, because I want to hear, I want to learn a little bit more about Aristotle for Novelists, which is Douglas's book, but also to have a conversation about the structure of story, because speculative fiction, whether it's a book like the Unlikely Phoenix, or if it's a book like 1984 or The Man in the High Castle, which I mentioned a little while ago, you walk around with those stories in your head, because they're somehow or another psychoactive. And Douglas, I mean, for 2,000 years, we've had dramatic writers looking at the Aristotelian principles to help put those images from stage and screen in your head. And what you're looking to bring here with Aristotle for Novelists is the Aristotelian framework in order to I mean, you get inhabited. I mean, the drama and comedy inhabits you. How are you finding your storytelling advice from Aristotle landing with folks who are themselves storytellers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think at its core, it's first important to look at, when you're looking at Aristotelian storytelling, what is it exactly? And one of the big things that Aristotle claimed was the reason why us humans were drawn to storytelling. And the reason why we were drawn to storytelling were two reasons: imitation and rhythm. So we have a natural, we learn to live by imitating our people, our parents, the people around us. And so stories are a natural evolution of this imitation of life. And so rhythm is another, I like to talk about that more when we're talking about voice and style and things of that nature. But just in terms of stories imitating life, when you look at the basis of an Aristotelian story, whether it's an Aristotelian comedy or an Aristotelian tragedy, is you have a central protagonist who wants something, and there is something standing in their way. Those obstacles are internal and external. If they overcome those obstacles, you have an Aristotelian comedy. If they succumb to those obstacles, you have a tragedy. Now, the reason why I prefaced what I'm about to say with that basis is because I haven't read this. You listed a bunch of dystopian work, and that dystopian work, a lot of it falls into that bucket of tragedy, right? Because you're not overcoming those obstacles and something bigger is happening. So what makes a tragedy so satisfying? What makes tragedies work is that they unveil a bigger truth about life. And we know that that truth is real. And so it satisfies something in us that is different than the protagonist, Luke Skywalker beating Darth Vader, or Rocky beating Apollo, or something of that nature. He's not overcoming those obstacles. They're succumbing to them, but we're learning something greater about ourselves and about the world when that tragedy happens. When I'm talking about Aristotelian tragedies, I always look at, if you want to talk about a dystopian novel, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. So what makes Cormac McCarthy's novel so satisfying, aside from the fact that he's a great writer, is the main protagonist of the story, he dies. Spoiler alert, the father dies. Why, he doesn't, but why is that satisfying to us? Because we know ultimately that every boy has to go and brave the world on his own one day. And so at the end, it's that bittersweet nature of, yes, he doesn't overcome, but we learn a greater truth about life. And so it's satisfying to us. And so to answer your question directly now, I think that all of those novels that you had mentioned, 1984, I'm sorry, I haven't read Frank's work, they probably unveil greater truths about the world that we're living in. And that's what makes them so satisfying to us. And again, this is all still based off of the Aristotelian model of a protagonist who wants something with something standing in their way, internal and external obstacles. Do they overcome? Comedy. Do they succumb? Tragedy. Of course, there's a blend of this. You can have tragic comedies and all that. But yeah, I for sake of me going on and on about this, because I could talk about it.
I think it's really fascinating. Frank, in the green room, you mentioned to Douglas that you use Aristotle quotes in a lot of your books.
I don't know a lot, several though. I mean, he's Aristotle. I mean, he said some profound things, and he's rather concise in a lot of the things that he said, and yet that they to understand that precise statement, takes a lot. I think one of my favorites is "We are what we repeatedly do." I could turn that over to Douglas and he could talk to us for half an hour easily on that. I'm certain on that statement alone. And yet we immediately know what it means after just a moment. And so the profundity of it isn't lost on us or doesn't require that deeper dive, even though that might be satisfying. And, we were also talking briefly about Game of Thrones, which is kind of funny because it's, such a cultural phenomenon, but there's a popular saying in that series where multiple characters repeat the word or the statement, words are wind, which is really just saying action means more than words, which is really saying we are what we repeatedly do. And so I think these things that Aristotle said just they're so fundamental to our understanding of who we are as people and that human experience.
Yeah, Douglas, let me stay with Frank for a second on this, because I do want to ask about an unlikely phoenix with that framework in mind, that we are what we repeatedly do, and the America that you're reflecting in the book on is a historic America that's happening just around the corner from us today, but it would be, forgive me again, it was 2080.
2081 is when the
2081, yeah. So the reason I bring this up is, what's your thoughts on America right now, Frank, with, we are what we repeatedly do? Is it us repeatedly tripping over our own 2 feet on the way to the arc of history, or?
That's a huge question, but I think that I think we are in a dangerous time, but at the same time, if you look back through our own history, we've had pendulum swings from moderate periods to more dangerous periods, and there hasn't been a conflagration of events occur during those more difficult times every time. I mean, yeah, we had a civil war. That was one time where it did. But there were other times where we had the civil rights movement, which, was a very difficult time period, but it didn't tear the nation apart. And we came out better on the other side of it. And, America, for all its flaws, is still a place where I think the vast majority of people actually believe in the same things. And our struggle is understanding that we're actually pulling the rope in the same direction without realizing it, and fighting over how we're engaging in that at times. And so, I mean, maybe that's a convoluted way of saying I still have hope that we'll figure it out. And that maybe some of the people who are doing the things that we find the most distressing, wherever we are on the spectrum, pointing to the other side, maybe those folks are the minority, and maybe the majority will reassert itself, and the pendulum will swing back towards moderation. If it doesn't, we have some ugly possibilities,
Well, wasn't Aristotle, Douglas, also in Medio Stat Virtus, like in Virtue Stands in the Middle? Is that my guy, or is that somebody else's guy?
No, yeah, that the golden mean principle, right? That I don't get into that too much in the book, but that's definitely Aristotle. Yeah. Um,
So, Douglas, when it comes right down to it, the Aristotelian principles that are those foundations for powerful story, and we've got a story here with an unlikely phoenix. We've got other stories that are reflecting on this American experience, that are reflecting cultural anxieties. They're reflecting, they're warning against injustice. There's a quality to the conversation that I think that the Aristotelian foundational principles about storytelling are inform not only a reader but a writer.
yeah, no, without question. And I think just to kind of build off of things that Frank was talking about, and to keep um, cohesiveness with our chat here, I think if we can look at everything that Frank was just talking about as a lens, like through the lens of story,
Mm-hmm.
even myself, even John, even Frank, you guys, we are all protagonists who want something with something standing in our way.
Mm-hmm.
Will we overcome those obstacles that are both internal and external, or will we succumb to those obstacles that are both internal and external? So do we have a comedy or do we have a tragedy? And I think if you use this framework to not just walk through, not just to you in your stories, but to walk through the world, you will see countless stories throughout your day. There's a great Joan Didion quote when she says, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live."
Hmm.
I buy that all
Yeah.
day long, 24 hours a day. And knowing that that is true, at least in my frame of the world, and how, 99% of what we do on a daily basis is storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
If we approach it with what I consider the root, the foundation of what a story is, you could see countless stories throughout your day and throughout the world. And so
Mm-hmm.
not only will it help your writing, but it will help you live a more enriched life, or a more enlightened life, because you'll see where, okay, what am I battling right now? I'm telling you, in this conversation, I'm battling nerves, or maybe I'm a little excited, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe will I overcome that?
Mm-hmm.
If I overcome it, we might have a comedy. If I blow up on screen, what does that teach the world about? What does that teach the world about, interviews, or Doug, or going live on YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this framework that you can literally use throughout life all the time, to kind of, and then take that and weave it into your stories. I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the really important things that I want to harp on here is Aristotle for novelists, and this principle way to look at story through principles, is not an attempt to tell writers how to write. And I make a really big difference when I talk about story versus writing. Writing is not story. Writing is the method by which you are telling your story. There's a lot of ways that you could tell your story. So these principles and this model of how to look at stories is foundational to storytelling, not foundational to writing.
That's
Writing is a whole other beast that relies on style, and Aristotle talks a little bit about that, but that is not the core of what I am talking about, or the work that Aristotle did primarily with poetics, for as an example, because a lot of these principles have been utilized, for, as you alluded to, for 2,000 years by dramatic writers, dating, you know, all the way up until present day. So these principles, whether it's logic or cohesiveness or believability, you'll see this when you turn on Netflix tonight, just as you
Mm-hmm.
will when you open up The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
If you know what principles you're looking for, not rules, not like you must do this on page 4, or
Mm-hmm.
you must do this by page 30. It's principles.
Yeah.
So is this story believable?
It's interesting that the page 4, page 30 idea. You find some advice for writers. That do have that very formulaic thing. But let me talk about readers for a minute, Douglas. Let's
Yes.
start with you on this. Your podcast, Books for Men. What's the state of American reading right now for men? I mean, seriously, like this is an untraveled area. I know really clearly that our frameworks, our network here at Every Library is a lot of women over 40 who are also readers. They're card-carrying members of the NPR crowd. They're voters. But I can't tell you the last time I ran into a guy who was part of our really activist network. And I'm sure a few of them are watching right now. But what's the state of reading right now? You got Books for Men out there. What are they telling you?
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, this is why I started the podcast, right? I mean, I had this epiphany without doing any kind of deep dive into the actual macro data, which there are tons of macro data on, specifically done by, I forget his name. He's an economist based at the University of Minnesota. He did a big research study on demographics of reading and the trends of reading. And so we could go into the details of citing all that, and you would see the decline and the upswing and everything that you are mentioning. But we don't need to even go that far. This is the point that you were making, I think, and that I, had that realization for, which is you get around a group of guys and simply ask the question, what are you reading? In my experience, I'd be very lucky if I found one or two of those guys that were actually reading, like out of 10. And if in the event those in that group of guys, now I'm not talking about going to like a book club and asking a group of guys, or going to a library. Now I'm just talking, you're at a party and you're around a group of guys and you ask, maybe 1 to 2 who say that they would read. In the event that that is the case, it's more likely than not that those 1 or 2 are actually reading nonfiction, not fiction. So I think this is even a bigger problem when you look at fiction more than looking at nonfiction. And this is why on my podcast, I feature every Monday, it goes back and forth. It goes from fiction and nonfiction, because for me, I think we've really lost something. And I would love for Frank to write a dystopian novel all about this with our losing of the ability to look at the world through metaphor. And I think that goes hand in hand with the deterioration of reading, so to speak, or the decline in reading, or less men reading less, or, we can go into all of that, but just the idea of looking at things as a metaphor. Now, maybe I was doing that before when I was talking about Aristotle and how we could walk through life and how we use a framework to see story and everything. Maybe that's a metaphor. But to me, this is really important. And this is what fiction teaches us. What is the metaphor in An Unlikely Phoenix? What is the metaphor in 1984? What is the metaphor in The Road? And we've lost our ability to, in my estimation, on the macro, to engage with the world in terms of metaphor. Everything needs to be spelled out. And when everything gets spelled out, we lose something that is essential. Another little saying that I have all the time is, mystery is what's missing. Mystery is what's missing. And when we have everything spelled out, it seems like it's doing us good, right? This is what nonfiction promises us. This is what maybe Aristotle for Novelists promises. It promises something that's spelled out for you. What I tried to do in that work, and what I hope that, I'm trying to communicate here, is that it's much broader than that. And the world is much broader than that. And that things aren't as certain as that. And so storytelling can't be X plus, 1 + 1 = 2. But if you look at enough stories over the course of history, what you can see is that there's things that they all share.
Yeah, that's the human condition. I mean, Frank, let me come to you on this. You're the author of over 50 novels, and I'm going to ask you not about your writing process here, but about the state of reading. What are your reflections on where America's at? Is it a lack of imagination right now? Is it a lack of attention span, or are you seeing it a little bit differently than that?
Well, I will defend male readers just a little bit and say that I do have a fair number of male readers, and I know that's not what you're implying, that no,
not at all.
No guys read, but Douglas is 100% correct. The majority of my readers are women, and they're women over 40, and they read more. And that's,
I'll tell you, the bedside pile on my side of the bed is this big. The bedside pile on my wife's side is going to fall over and kill us one day.
Yeah, that's been my experience, and but there are guys out there who are reading. I do think that the influx of our phone use and the TikTok approach to phone use has somewhat impacted people's willingness to read, because it does take a little bit longer. And when you talk about the lack of mystery, I think, Douglas, you're really onto something, because uh, I think people are multitasking their entertainment. And so when somebody's watching a Netflix TV show or a movie and they're flipping on their phone at the same time, then they don't get what happened. They miss the nuance. And so then they think the show is stupid and they give it a bad review. So the people who make the next show see that. And so they hold their hand and pound the desk and scream loudly at every plot point. And all the mystery is gone for those of us who are actually paying attention. We're like, whoa, you didn't have to hit me over the head with that. I'm actually paying attention here. But for the people who are on their couch, not looking at the screen, flipping through Reddit or whatever, they also got it because it was screamed so loudly. And so that's, I think you almost have a dichotomy of those types of shows that are being made, and then the people are going, no, if you don't pay attention, you're not going to get it too bad. And they make a show that has that mystery that Douglas is talking about. And you're really almost speaking to two separate types of audiences at this point, is my take.
It's fascinating. I mean, there are a lot of what ifs that happen in speculative fiction. There's a lot of what ifs that happen in any kind of fiction, because it is intended to bring up that mystery that you were talking about, Douglas. Let me wrap us up with a Banned Books Week question, though, guys. It's been a very interesting conversation. We've gotten some good pings in the chat too, with people saying things like it's a good conversation, which I appreciate. Let me do the Banned Books Week wrap up conversation. We're at a time right now of polarization. There is an undoubted time of censorship happening. Let me start with you, Frank. What's the role of fiction in helping to safeguard truth?
I think it's this being the catalyst for the start of conversation. You have to get somebody's attention to do that sometimes, and you have to ask a question, and it might be a slightly provocative one in order to get the conversation going. But it also has the ability to reveal a thought as well. And if someone is willing to read a book and actually listen all the way through, it might be a conversation they wouldn't be willing to have face to face. And so you might reveal a perspective or a thought or an idea. And particularly in crime fiction and definitely in science fiction, it can come beneath the guard that people sometimes put up to new ideas, and just get them thinking about it. And then maybe they'll be more amenable to a face-to-face conversation. But fiction has to say things maybe that are difficult to say. What is it that fiction is? Lies that reveal the truth. Something, again, I can't attribute that to who said it, so I'm horrible today. I'm 0 for 2 on that count, but I think there's some truth to that view.
Oh, I appreciate that. The idea that fiction allows us a little bit of space and a little bit of grace to ask those hard questions and to have those hard conversations. Douglas, why don't you bring us home today? The ancient wisdom, as it were, around. Aristotle was not writing in a time that was placid in any way, shape, or form. And the particulars around the polarization of the body politic, and censorship is a much more modern construct. But fiction, the idea of the story, what does the Aristotelian principle teach us about that in terms of safeguarding truth?
So I'm going to reference Aristotle here, but I do want to point something out that I think is essential about reading in general. And reading, by its very nature, is self-censoring, meaning we don't need anybody to censor reading, because unlike other forms of media, like if I'm listening to something that I don't want to hear, I can't just turn it off. It's playing in the background. It's playing at the concert. It's playing at the club. It's playing wherever. Same thing maybe with even a movie, right? Although it is a little bit more self-censoring. Reading, a reader decides with every word if they want to read the next word. which makes things that are written on the page but different than if they're put in a song or in a movie. Not that you can't do the other. It's just things you can do things on the page because of the intimacy and the less reactivity of it, of the nature of the form, that enables you to go places that are very, very essential, but could be dark or could be um, gripping in a way and off-putting to some. But you always have the ability to say, I don't want to read this next word, and close the book. So the idea that someone is going to censor words is kind of silly to me, because it's there's a self-censorship that's packed into the actual form. Now, having said that, I want to build off of what Frank said and say, in my estimation, art, the necessity of art is not to provide answers. It's to ask questions. And if you go into reading something with that framework in mind, anything becomes more appealing, because you're realizing this person isn't giving me the answer. They're just provoking me to ask another question. And the tension actually lies in all of the diversity of opinions that come from that question, not the answer somebody is giving you. And so this, to me, is the root and the essentialness of, call it transversive art, or banned books, which in my world has no place, for the record. These are things that are necessary to provoke those conversations. And if you have something to say on your end that about it negatively, and I have something to say about it positively, or vice versa, that's interesting. That's what makes it interesting. And so I really just kind of wanted to hammer that home while I had the mic, because it's really important to me. And I think that this is a great forum to talk about that, to talk about this stuff. And just because you asked me a question about Aristotle and I kind of avoided it, I will say that, I talked to you guys in the green room about this before we started, is that Aristotle is very, very specific in poetics, saying that writers should not be held to the same moral standards as citizens are in regular life. And the reason why he says that is not because he doesn't believe that you should be good citizens. It's because in order to tell stories that provoke, that do what they're supposed to do, that tell the truth, right? You have to go to places that are unsavory. And the only time that you could criticize a writer in the Aristotelian world, and he says this in Poetics, in his ways that you can criticize a writer or criticize a story, is if that brutality or that depravity or perversity or whatever it is unnecessary to the story that you're telling. Because in an Aristotelian story, everything has to be essential. That's what makes it so lean, so tight. So what appeals, so when you watch it on TV and movies and you're like, oh, this is so tight, it's because they're going off of that essentialness. Everything is, novels are a little more fluid. But what I'm getting at is he leaves open space for you to tell those stories, because they are important to, going back to what he said, imitating life. That is the reason why we are drawn to stories. And so if we are imitating life, there's a lot of different life to imitate out there, a lot of different stories to tell. And the bounds are really unknown, right? Like, so the idea that we're not going to be able to tell certain kinds of stories because...
Oh, that is the heart of the band.
I mean, for me, it's like, if you confusing art and morality is in my view of the world. Now, this can get in, for me, confusing art and morality is a big misstep, because art's purpose is to push culture forward by pushing the boundaries. Meaning, it's not to say I'm a good guy you're a good guy. Look at me. You know, I'm virtuous. I follow all these rules and you don't. I could be the most virtuous person in the world, but I can also write the darkest story ever that is articulating something that is, you know, that is completely outside of the bounds of my reality and my walking, living experience. And there has to be room for that, because the purpose is to push culture forward, is to push the boundaries. It's not to say, I'm a good person, you're a good person. You know, that's not the, you may take that away as a reader, but that's, in my view, that's not the purpose. The purpose is not to, unless it's a morality tale, Three Little Pigs, you know, something like that. But like outside that, we're pushing.
Yeah, I get it. That's the whole point right now, is to get back to a place where to Frank's point earlier, it's the conflict of conversation and that tension. And to your point here, like what can we talk to each other like adults? You know, when it comes right down to it, can we talk to each other like citizens, like adults? So, Douglas Vigliotti, thank you so much for being part of this conversation today. Frank Saverio, thank you very much too. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you guys. Folks, all the Ben Books Week events are up on Every Library's Facebook, Every Library's YouTube. Engage this chat, engage this conversation. We had a lot of bon mots today, and we had a lot of kind of, I mean, Frank, we almost got there a couple times with our quotes. I think that this one needs like some footnotes when we rebroadcast it. I got to put up some references. So thanks to you both, guys.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm going to give the wave to the camera. I'm going to put the card, and I'll see you in the green room.